In an emotional moment that shook the nation, Vice President JD Vance led a heartfelt prayer honoring his close friend Charlie Kirk, who was tragically assassinated during a campus event in Utah. With millions watching, Vance's words brought America to tears as he remembered Kirk's fight for conservative values and freedom. This powerful tribute became one of the most moving moments in recent U.S. history, leaving viewers across the nation grieving and united in sorrow. The campus of Utah Valley University had been buzzing with excitement. Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist who had inspired millions of young Americans, was on stage answering tough questions with his usual calmness. Then, in one shattering instant, everything changed. A sudden crack split the air. Students screamed. Security rushed forward. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Charlie collapsed on the stage, his hand clutching his chest. The crowd scattered, terrified, as the sound of running feet echoed in the arena. The shooter slipped away into the night, leaving behind devastation and unanswered questions. News alerts flashed across phones within minutes. Charlie Kirk shot at Utah Valley University. Across America, living rooms filled with silence and disbelief. Tears streamed as people realized what had just happened. Social media exploded with sorrow and anger. In Washington, Vice President JD Vance was pulled aside in the West Wing. He froze as he read the incoming message. His hands trembled. His closest friend, more like a brother than a colleague, had been taken by an act of pure evil. In that moment, JD's world cracked open, and America braced for the most painful prayer it would ever hear. Sirens wailed across Utah as federal agents swarmed the campus. The shooter was gone, but the hunt was only beginning. Helicopters hovered overhead, lights sweeping across rooftops. Students wept in the parking lot, some clutching each other, some calling their parents in panic. Charlie's voice, the one that had once calmed, challenged, and inspired, was now silent. President Donald Trump, somber and furious, addressed the nation from the Oval Office. This cowardly attack on Charlie Kirk was not just an attack on a man. It was an attack on America's soul. We will find the perpetrator. Justice will be swift and justice will be unforgiving. But even as the president's words rang across the airwaves, it was JD Vance whom Americans wanted to hear. Everyone knew how close he and Charlie were. Everyone waited for the vice president's voice, his prayer, his tribute. JD sat alone in his office, head bowed. Reporters gathered outside. His staff whispered that the cameras were ready. But JD wasn't thinking about cameras. He was thinking about the last hug Charlie gave him, the last time he said, "I'm praying for you, brother." Now JD had to pray for him. The White House press briefing room was silent, not the usual restless silence filled with chatter and shuffling, but a heavy silence like the air before a storm. JD Vance walked in slowly, his face pale, his eyes red from tears he couldn't hold back. The cameras clicked, but no one spoke. Even the reporters, so often sharp and combative, were subdued. He placed his hands on the podium, gripping it as though steadying himself against a wave. He paused. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then, with a trembling voice, he began, "The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk is nothing short of evil, a cowardly attack on America's very soul." His voice cracked, but he pressed on, his words heavy with grief. Charlie was a Christian who had accepted Jesus as his savior. Tonight we know the Lord is greeting him, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Some in the room wept openly. Others bowed their heads. Across the country, millions of Americans watched JD struggle through his tears. And in that moment, it felt as if the entire nation had gathered for a prayer that would echo forever. Phones across the nation buzzed non-stop. Every television channel cut to live coverage. News anchors spoke with trembling voices, trying to piece together what had happened in Utah. Students who had been inside the hall gave interviews through tears, their voices shaking as they described the chaos. "He was just talking about faith and freedom," one young woman whispered, her mascara smeared from crying. "And then the shot. I still hear it in my head." America felt paralyzed. Churches opened their doors for prayer. Families sat quietly around dinner tables, struggling to find words. People who never met Charlie Kirk found themselves weeping, feeling as if they had lost a member of their own family. Meanwhile, JD Vance prepared himself to speak again. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing, texts from supporters, fellow politicians, and ordinary Americans pouring in. But he didn't look at the screen. Instead, he sat in silence, staring at a single photo of him and Charlie laughing together backstage at a Turning Point USA event. The weight on his shoulders grew heavier by the second. Soon he would have to lift America with words that could barely escape his own broken heart. As JD sat in his office, his mind drifted back to the first time Charlie encouraged him. It was 2017, after JD had appeared on Tucker Carlson's show. He remembered how a simple Twitter message, just a few words of kindness, had sparked a brotherhood that would change his life. Charlie wasn't just a friend. He was a mentor, a listener, and at times even a guide. When JD was unsure about running for Senate in 2021, Charlie had been the first person to talk him through it. He believed in JD long before the polls did. Now that voice of encouragement was gone. JD whispered quietly to himself, "How do I do this without you, brother?" His staff looked at him, unsure of what to say. They had never seen the vice president this vulnerable. Across social media, Americans began posting their own memories. Old photos from TPUSA events filled timelines. Young people shared how Charlie had inspired them to stand tall in classrooms, to defend their beliefs without fear. Grief was everywhere, yet so was unity. For the first time in years, America wasn't split down the middle, it was joined in tears. The phone rang. JD answered with a hoarse, "Hello." On the other end was President Donald Trump. His voice was heavy, slower than usual, weighed down with grief. "Gee," the president said softly, "I know he was a very good friend of yours." JD closed his eyes, fighting back tears. "Yes, sir. He was like a brother to me." There was a pause. Then Trump continued, "Charlie really loved his family. He was so proud of Erica and the kids. I saw it every time I spoke with him. This loss, it's beyond words, but we cannot let it be in vain. You and I, we must carry his fight forward." JD nodded silently, gripping the phone tighter. The president's words echoed in his chest. Minutes later, the White House press team announced that JD would lead the nation in prayer. Later that evening, millions were already tuning in, waiting, grieving, hoping for words that could bind the country together. As JD prepared, he whispered under his breath, "Charlie, help me. I need your strength tonight." The stage was set. The nation was holding its breath for his prayer. By evening, every news network had turned its cameras to Washington. From New York to Los Angeles, from small-town diners to college dorms, people were glued to their screens. Even airports had hushed as travelers stopped in front of televisions, waiting for JD Vance to speak. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram were flooded with posts bearing Charlie Kirk's photo. Some carried Bible verses, others carried raw grief. Thousands typed the same words. Pray for Erica. Pray for the kids. JD knew the weight of what he was about to do. His words would not just be for himself, not just for Charlie's family, but for the soul of a wounded nation. His wife entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You can do this," she whispered. "You're speaking for all of us tonight." He nodded, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. He whispered under his breath, "Lord, give me strength." And somewhere in that silent moment, America held its breath with him. JD stepped out from his office, surrounded by Secret Service. The hallways of the White House, usually buzzing with staff, had fallen silent. Aides stood against the walls with red eyes, some whispering prayers of their own. As JD walked, every step felt heavier than the last. He could hear the muffled sound of reporters beyond the doors, the low hum of cameras waiting to capture his face. He carried no notes. He had decided that every word tonight would come straight from the heart. At the doorway, he paused, gripping the frame for balance. Images of Charlie flashed through his mind, laughing backstage, speaking to a packed arena, hugging his children. The weight of those memories nearly broke him, but he steadied himself. When the doors opened, the room fell silent. Reporters lowered their heads, sensing the gravity of the moment. Millions were watching, but the silence was so thick, it felt like the entire world had stopped spinning. JD stepped up to the podium. His voice trembled as he began. JD took a long breath. His hands tightened on the podium as he looked straight into the cameras. His lips parted, but for a moment no sound came. Finally, his voice, raw, heavy with emotion, broke the silence. The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk is nothing short of evil, a cowardly attack on America's very soul. The words cut through the air like a knife. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. Faith, family, freedom, the right to speak truth have been trampled by violence. My blood boils. Justice must be relentless and unforgiving. He paused, his chest rising and falling as he fought back tears. Charlie Kirk was a Christian who accepted Jesus as his savior. Tonight I know the Lord is greeting him, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Across living rooms and churches, people wept openly. Pastors replayed the words for congregations gathered in prayer circles. Families watching together bowed their heads in silence. JD's grief became the nation's grief. His voice carried not just sorrow, but a fierce promise. Charlie Kirk's fight for truth and freedom would not die here. As JD's first words echoed across America, living rooms fell silent. People sat frozen, clinging to every syllable. Some bowed their heads. Others wiped away tears they didn't expect to shed. In small-town churches, pastors replayed his prayer through speakers. In college dorms, students who once debated Charlie fiercely now whispered that they never imagined his voice would be silenced like this. JD's trembling words reached across political divides. For one night, Americans of all walks of life felt the same wound. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about the loss of a husband, a father, a man who had dared to live with conviction. On Twitter, the hashtag #PrayForCharlie shot to the top worldwide. Strangers shared their grief as though they had lost someone close. "I never met him," one woman posted. "But I feel like I lost my brother tonight." Inside the White House, aides watched from the hall, some holding tissues. They whispered among themselves, "He's speaking not just as vice president, but as a friend who is shattered." JD's raw emotion pulled the country into his grief, uniting millions through tears. JD steadied himself, though his voice still quivered. He leaned closer to the microphone and spoke not as vice president, but as a grieving friend. Charlie's children will be raised with stories instead of memories, photographs instead of laughter, and silence where their father's voice should have echoed, JD said, his voice breaking mid-sentence. Gasps filled the room. Reporters lowered their cameras, unable to hide their own tears. JD continued, "Charlie Kirk's life should serve as a reminder. Faith, family, country, love. He was a servant of God, pouring himself into the fight for justice and freedom. My heart aches for Erica and their 2 beautiful children, but I promise them his legacy will live on." He paused, staring down for a moment, then looked back up, his eyes glistening. Harley was an American hero, and tonight the heavens gained a soldier of Christ. Every word pierced through televisions and phones across America. Families held hands. Churches erupted in prayer circles. Even strangers on city streets stood in silence, listening through car radios. JD wasn't just remembering Charlie, he was making sure the entire nation remembered with him. JD's voice softened as he let his guard down. "A while ago in 2017, he said, I appeared on Tucker Carlson's Fox show. Afterwards, a name I barely knew sent me a Twitter message. He told me I did a great job. That was Charlie Kirk." The room leaned in. Reporters scribbled every word. That one act of kindness had started a friendship that lasted until today. Charlie was fascinated by ideas. He was humble enough to change his mind, and generous enough to welcome others when they changed theirs. He never said, "I told you so." With Charlie, it was always, "Welcome." JD smiled faintly through tears, recalling those early years. "When I considered running for Senate, Charlie was the first person I called. He introduced me to people, gave me honest feedback, and supported me when I was polling at less than 5%. He had no reason to do it. He did it because he was my friend and because he was a good man." JD paused, letting the weight of those words hang. For millions watching, the story wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about friendship, about loyalty, about love that never dies. JD's voice deepened as he remembered more. Charlie wasn't just a political leader. He was a brother in the fight. When I doubted myself, he lifted me. When I felt the weight of politics crushing my family, he reminded me that faith would carry us through. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "When I became the vice president nominee, Charlie was there. He prayed with me. He hugged me. He told me, 'Jay, focus on the mission. God gave you this path for a reason.'" The cameras captured every tear that slid down JD's face. America could feel his heart breaking in real time. Meanwhile, outside the White House, crowds had gathered with candles. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, holding hands, praying and singing hymns. Some held up posters with Charlie's picture. Others waved American flags in silent tribute. Across the country, the scene repeated. In towns, in churches, in city parks, Americans mourned together. For the first time in years, unity wasn't about politics. It was about grief and the love of a man who had touched so many lives. JD steadied himself again. His eyes glistened as he turned his words toward Charlie's family. "Charlie was proudest when he spoke of Erica and their 2 children, JD said softly. "He often told me politics can wait. My family comes first. He loved being a husband. He loved being a father. That was his greatest joy. JD's voice cracked as he imagined the pain Erica must be feeling now. My heart aches for her and for those children who will now grow up with stories instead of their father's laughter. That empty chair at the dinner table, that silence in the house, it will echo forever. But America must help fill that silence with love and prayer. In living rooms across the country, families hugged tighter. Parents looked at their children with tears in their eyes. On the streets outside, the crowd grew larger. Some began chanting softly, "Charlie! Charlie!" while others knelt in prayer. The vice president's words weren't just about politics anymore. They were about the fragility of life, the sanctity of family, and the hole left when love is stolen by violence. JD lifted his head, his voice growing stronger, as though Charlie himself was giving him courage. Charlie Kirk was more than a leader. He was a man of faith. He poured his life into service not for recognition, but because he believed God had called him to something bigger than himself. He continued. Charlie challenged his generation with conviction and courage. He believed in the power of truth, in the strength of family, and in the responsibility we all share to defend freedom. He didn't just speak these values, he lived them. Across the nation, people nodded through their tears. They weren't just mourning a man. They were being reminded of what he stood for. JD's words cut deeper. Charlie's life is a reminder to us all. Our days are not promised, but if we live them with love, with courage, and with faith in God, then even in death, our legacy speaks louder than hate. The room remained silent, but the nation erupted in quiet sobs. For many, this was no longer just a prayer. It was a call to live with the same fire Charlie carried every day of his life. JD's voice trembled as he recalled one of his hardest seasons. When I was running for Senate, I'll be honest, I almost gave up. The pressure, the attacks, the polls telling me I didn't stand a chance, it weighed on me. But Charlie never let me quit. He lifted his eyes, remembering. He called me night after night. He prayed with me when I was too tired to pray. He walked me into rooms full of donors when no one knew my name. And he never asked for anything in return, only that I stayed true to the mission. The press room stayed silent. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. JD continued, I wouldn't be here standing as your vice president if not for Charlie Kirk. He believed in me before the world did. And tonight I stand here believing in him. Across the nation, people whispered to themselves, this is what real friendship looks like. JD's expression softened as his words turned toward his own children. When I became vice president, my kids struggled. The constant detail, the attention, the cameras, it was overwhelming for them. And I carried this guilt because I had pulled them into a life they never asked for. He swallowed hard. But Charlie was always there. He'd text me, Jay, you're doing the right thing. Stay strong for them, and I'll pray for your family every day. And he did. He checked in on my wife. He made sure my children felt loved, even in the shadow of politics. JD's voice broke. He was the kind of friend who reminded me that family mattered more than anything else. Even in the busiest moments, he never forgot to ask about the kids. For millions watching, it was no longer just a story of politics. It was a reminder of the small, unseen ways true friends carry each other. The vice president's tone grew stronger. Charlie was a man of faith. We'd argue about theology, Catholicism versus Protestantism, but those arguments always ended with laughter because deep down, we both knew what united us was far greater than what divided us. He paused. Looking down, his eyes filled with both grief and pride. Charlie didn't just talk about Jesus. He lived like a man who loved him. His kindness, his courage, his honesty, it all flowed from his faith. That's why so many people followed him, because they saw something real. JD's voice grew heavier. Someone once told me Charlie died doing what he loved, speaking truth, answering questions even when the crowds weren't friendly. That's who he was. Brave enough to stand, humble enough to listen, faithful enough to endure. As his words carried across the airwaves, pastors shared them from pulpits. Families knelt together. Young people wiped away tears. JD wasn't just giving a eulogy. He was reminding America of the power of faith lived boldly. JD's voice grew steady as he shared another memory. During the 2024 campaign, we had a rally in Wisconsin. It was late, the crowd was thin, and honestly, I thought it was one of my worst speeches. I walked off stage feeling defeated. He took a shaky breath. Charlie was waiting for me backstage. He wrapped his arm around me and said, "Brother, don't you see? You don't need 1,000 cheers to change the world. You just need one heart to believe. And tonight you reached more than one. JD paused, his lips trembling. That was Charlie, always lifting others, always reminding us of the bigger picture. I left that rally with hope again, not because of applause, but because of his encouragement. In homes across America, parents whispered these words to their children. One heart is enough. They wept, realizing how deeply Charlie's words still spoke even after his death. JD's tone softened. Charlie wasn't just a leader. He was a listener. In politics, people talk over each other all the time, but Charlie listened with his whole heart. He looked down at the podium for a moment before lifting his eyes again. I remember one night I was exhausted, overwhelmed with the attacks, the media, the non-stop battles. I called Charlie, and instead of giving me a speech, he just listened. He let me pour it all out. Then he said, "I hear you, JD, and I'm with you. Sometimes that's all you need, to know someone is with you." JD's voice cracked. Tonight, I wish I could call him one more time. But I know he's listening from above. The nation wept with him. Families, pastors, college students, everyone watching felt as though they too had lost a friend who had once listened to their struggles. JD's hands tightened on the podium. His grief turned into a vow. Charlie was more than a friend. He was my brother, and brothers never walk alone. Tonight, even though he's gone, I still feel him standing with me. He raised his voice slightly, the room trembling with conviction. The brutal murder of Charlie Kirk was an act of pure evil, but evil will not win. His legacy of faith, family, and freedom will live on in all of us. Tears streamed down JD's face as he declared, "Charlie's fight is now our fight. His mission is now our mission. And we will not rest until his vision for America shines brighter than ever before." Outside the White House, the crowd erupted in chants of, "We'll carry the torch." Candles flickered in the night as strangers embraced one another, united by grief, but also by hope. Millions watching at home wept openly. For them, this wasn't just JD Vance's prayer, it was the cry of a wounded nation, promising to honor Charlie's legacy together. JD paused, remembering his conversation with President Trump earlier that day. When I walked into the Oval Office, the president didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, nodded, and said quietly, "I know he was a good friend of yours. He really loved his family." JD's voice broke as he recalled it. The president was right. Charlie loved Erica and those two little children more than anything. For all his public work, his heart was always at home. And that's what makes this so painful. The world lost a leader, but a family lost their anchor. The silence in the briefing room was heavy. Reporters who were usually quick to challenge had lowered their pens, some even wiping away tears. Outside, Americans replayed the clip over and over, hearing not a politician's words but a friend's aching grief. The image of a vice president crying openly shook the nation. It was raw, unfiltered humanity in a time of tragedy. JD wiped his eyes and leaned closer to the microphone. I was in a West Wing meeting when my phone started buzzing non-stop. It was our group chat, the one Charlie was in with friends, colleagues, and brothers in the fight for America. Everyone was writing, "We're praying for you, Charlie." His voice cracked. That's how I learned the news. Not from a headline, not from the Secret Service, but from the people who loved him the most, desperately asking God for a miracle. JD paused, unable to speak for a moment. I prayed too over and over. First for healing, then for peace. But God had other plans. And tonight, I can only trust that Charlie is with him now, talking to the big man directly. The crowd outside the White House held up their phones, lighting the night sky, symbolizing the group chat that would never be the same again. Millions at home whispered, "We're praying for you, Charlie." JD's eyes watered as he continued, his tone filled with sorrow. What haunts me most is the empty seat. At dinners, at conferences, at meetings, Charlie was always there. He had this way of making every room brighter, and now that seat will forever be empty. He shook his head slowly. His children will grow up hearing stories instead of hearing his laughter. Erica will see photographs where his presence should have been. And all of us in America will feel that silence, the kind that no words can fill. At that moment, cameras captured the vice president stepping away from the podium briefly to collect himself. The silence in the room was deafening. Not a cough, not a whisper, just the sound of grief hanging heavy in the air. And across the nation, living rooms, churches, and city streets mirrored that silence. Families embraced, strangers wept. A nation mourned the man whose absence was already louder than his voice had ever been. JD Vance's voice shook as he described a moment etched in his memory. After every Turning Point USA event, after the cameras were off, after the last handshake was made, Charlie would always give me a hug. Not a polite pat on the back, but a strong, brotherly hug. He'd whisper, "I'm praying for you, JD. Keep fighting." JD's eyes closed as tears streamed down. That hug became my strength. In the darkest hours, when I doubted myself, I remembered that embrace. It wasn't just encouragement, it was a reminder that I wasn't alone. The press room grew stiller. Families watching at home recalled their own friends who had given them strength in hard times. Many wept, whispering, "I miss that hug." For JD, that hug now lived only in memory. But for America, it became a symbol, a reminder of loyalty, faith, and brotherhood that no assassin's bullet could erase. JD steadied himself and went on. Charlie had this gift. He could walk into a room filled with tension, even anger, and calm it with his voice. I've seen protesters screaming at him, and instead of lashing back, he'd say, "Let's talk. Let's understand each other." JD's voice cracked again. That's what America lost. Not just a conservative leader, but a man who believed dialogue mattered. He didn't just fight, he listened. He built bridges even when others wanted to burn them. Outside, candlelight vigils spread to campuses and city squares. Students carried handwritten signs, "Charlie listened." The message traveled across social media, uniting people who never even met him, but felt his presence through his work. Millions cried as they realized this rare gift, a calm voice in a divided nation, was now silent. JD paused before delivering one of the most moving parts of his tribute. "This morning in the Oval Office, President Trump said to me, 'Charlie helped us win not just elections, but the hearts of young Americans.'" JD lowered his head. The president was right. Charlie wasn't just a strategist. He wasn't chasing titles or power. He was chasing truth. And because of that, he changed the direction of this country. His tone grew heavier. And now that seat he once filled in so many rooms will remain empty. But America must decide, will we leave it empty or will we fill it by carrying on his mission? The nation listened in silence. This was no longer just grief. It was a challenge. JD's words cut deep. Charlie's life had been a torch, and now that torch needed hands willing to carry it forward. Across the country, millions whispered the same vow. We'll carry it. As JD Vance stood at the podium, he suddenly grew quiet. Cameras zoomed in as he closed his eyes, his lips trembling. For nearly a full minute, the entire nation watched in silence as the vice president bowed his head in prayer. Tears rolled down his cheeks. The silence was deafening. Millions at home put down their phones, their forks, their distractions. For that one moment, America was united in grief. Then JD whispered, "Father in heaven, receive your servant Charlie. Give strength to Erica, protect their children. And give this nation the courage to honor him, not just with words, but with action." People wept across living rooms and crowded streets, repeating amen as if they were in the same room with him. In that silence, hearts broke. But something else happened. Faith stirred. Many who had grown cold or skeptical felt themselves whispering prayers again for the first time in years. JD straightened himself, his voice steadier now. "Charlie lit a torch," he declared, gripping the podium. And though the enemy thought they could snuff it out with one bullet, they were wrong. Because today, millions of us carry that torch. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in tears and nods. People watching online typed, "We'll carry it." College students who once felt hopeless now felt a fire in their chest. Families at kitchen tables held hands tighter. JD's words rang. Charlie Kirk was not silenced. He speaks louder now through every person who takes up his fight for truth, for freedom, for faith, and for America. Across the nation, vigils turned into commitments. People lifted candles whispering, "I'll be the torchbearer." It was no longer just JD mourning a friend. It was America taking responsibility to ensure Charlie's legacy would never be buried. JD's final words shook even the toughest hearts. "Charlie, my brother, you ran a good race. You finished strong. Rest now. We've got it from here." The vice president stepped back, wiping his face. The cameras captured the crowd. Men, women, children sobbing openly. Across the nation, millions cried in unison. But grief turned into resolve. Americans whispered promises to love their families more deeply, to fight for truth more boldly, and to live with the kind of courage Charlie showed. That night, candles flickered in every state. Online feeds were filled not with anger, but with prayer, love, and unity. America mourned, but America also rose, and with that, JD Vance's prayer became history, one of the most emotional and unifying moments this country had seen in decades. If this story moved you, let your heart speak. Smash the like button to honor Charlie's memory. Drop a comment below, share how his life touched you. And don't just watch. Subscribe to join this growing family of truth and hope. Become a member today to unlock special features and stand with us in carrying Charlie's torch. Together, we keep his fight alive. America weeps, but America will rise. Music,